The phone vibrated under Sarah's pillow again, this time with a long soft buzz that made her skin crawl. She sat up in the pitch-black room, heart pounding, trying to calm the rising fear that always came around this time. It was 3 a.m. again, same time every night since the funeral, since Mark was buried, since everything fell apart. She fumbled for the screen, her fingers trembling and eyes blurry, but the screen was already glowing bright, with a number she had never seen before. No name. No ID, just a long string of zeros. She answered slowly, holding the phone to her ear with shaky hands, hoping to hear silence, hoping it was a wrong number. But then came the whisper, soft, breathless, slow, and inhuman. It said, "I know what you did." Sarah froze. She tried to speak, but her mouth went dry, her throat locked shut. Her lips trembled, and she could only listen as the whisper turned into a slow, distorted laugh. Something unnatural, something too close and far at the same time. Then the call dropped. Just like every other night, she sat in the darkness, the air around her cold and tight, like the walls were breathing, closing, and her hands gripped the blanket like a lifeline, and her eyes flicked to the hallway where the shadows always seemed to stretch just a little longer than they should since Mark died, since she moved here, since the whispers began. Her friends told her it was grief, trauma, exhaustion, the mind playing tricks. They told her she needed sleep and therapy and time, but none of them had heard that voice. None of them had been in her house at night. None of them knew how it felt to know the dead might not be gone. She stood up and walked slowly to the kitchen, not turning on the light, just following muscle memory in the dark, like she always did at this hour when the silence screamed and the memories bled from every wall. She poured a glass of water and stared out the window at the street, empty and still, but she felt something. There's something watching from behind the hedge, just like the night before and the night before that. Her mind drifted to Mark, to the last fight, the shouting, the slammed doors, and that final moment when he walked out and never came back. They said it was an accident, that the road was slippery, that he lost control, that it was no one's fault. But Sarah had always wondered, what if her fingers clenched the glass too tight and it slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor, the sound sharp and jagged like a scream. In the silence, she dropped to her knees, breathing heavy, heart hammering as she picked up the pieces of glass, blood blooming on her fingers, mixing with the water until it looked like something alive crawling across the floor. Then the phone rang again, vibrating loudly from the table right behind her. She turned slowly, her entire body tensing, every muscle screaming not to answer, but she reached for it anyway. The number was the same, all zeros, no name, no trace. She lifted the phone and pressed it to her ear. This time the whisper was slower, more intimate. "Sarah," it said, "you left me there. You left me to die. You locked the door and walked away." Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The voice was Mark's, no doubt. No mistake, distorted, but still his, as if it was being dragged through water, through something heavy and unnatural. It was angry, it was in pain, and it knew. "You promised me, Sarah," the voice said, "we were forever, and then you killed." Mesh dropped the phone and backed away, crawling across the floor, bleeding and gasping. Her back hit the fridge, and she looked up into the dark hallway where she heard footsteps, slow, heavy, uneven footsteps coming closer. The door to the hallway creaked open slowly. No wind, no movement, just the sound of old wood shifting, then silence, thick and deep as the air grew colder. The footsteps stopped, and she could feel someone or something standing there watching her. She whispered, "Mark," her voice breaking, but no reply. Came only a soft choking sound, like someone trying to breathe through water, and then the shadow moved. She screamed and grabbed the closest thing, a knife from the sink, and pointed it toward the darkness, but nothing was there, only the hallway, and the cold and the smell of wet earth, like a fresh grave. Morning came with pale light and silence, no sign of footsteps, no broken door, no shadow, only the blood on the kitchen tiles, and the shattered glass, and the phone lying face down with the screen cracked and black. She didn't sleep that day. She couldn't. Her mind replayed every second, every word, every sound. She tried to call the number back, but it was disconnected. Unreachable, not real, not possible. That night she stayed awake, phone in hand, lights on every corner of the house, glowing like fire against the dark. But the moment the clock turned 3 a.m., the lights flickered, the phone rang, and the air turned cold. Again she answered with shaking hands, and the voice came softer this time. Almost gentle. "Sarah," it whispered, "I'm not gone. I'm not in the ground, and you know it," she screamed, and threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and broke in 2 pieces, but the whisper didn't stop. It echoed through the room, through the walls inside her mind. "You will see me again, Sarah, and this time you won't run." Temperature dropped further, and the mirror in the hallway fogged up slowly, and a message appeared on the glass, written in streaks of vapor, 3 words: "Cold and sharp." "Behind you." Sarah turned slowly, heart hammering louder than ever before, and her scream was swallowed by the dark. Chris sat alone on the couch, the TV flickering with an old black and white horror movie he had seen 100 times before. He barely watched it. His eyes were heavy with sleeplessness, and his thoughts heavy with regret. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the apartment walls, the rain tapping a slow, steady rhythm on the windows like fingernails trying to get in. It had been 1 year since his divorce, 1 year since the silence began filling every inch of his life, 1 year since he last saw his daughter, since he made a mistake so big it swallowed everything he loved. He stared at her photo on the table. Next to the couch, a small frame with a smiling girl missing her front teeth, her eyes full of hope. Then came the knock, soft but clear, just after midnight. Chris stood slowly, the sound repeating a little louder this time. 3 knocks, 1 pause, then 2 more. It was a strange pattern, one that made his skin crawl, though he could not say why. He opened the door. Stood a girl no older than 16, soaked from head to toe. Her dark hair stuck to her face, her lips shivering, her eyes wide with fear. She looked at him and whispered, "Please help me, they are coming. Please let me in." Chris hesitated only for a second before stepping aside and letting her inside. She stumbled past him and collapsed on the floor, shaking violently. He shut the door quickly, locked it, and pulled a towel from the bathroom, handing it to her. She thanked him softly and wrapped herself in it, staring at the floor with eyes that never blinked. He asked her name, but she didn't answer. He asked what happened. She only said, "I ran away, and I think they followed me." Chris didn't press her further. Something about her voice, her posture, her whole presence felt fragile, like if he said one wrong word she would shatter. He made her tea and they sat in silence, the clock ticking louder than the storm. She flinched at every sound, every creak, every gust of wind, her eyes darting to the door like she expected it to burst open any moment. Chris wanted to call the police or someone, but her fear was too real, too raw, and something in his gut told him this was more than just a runaway girl. Then she began to hum softly, a lullaby Chris recognized but couldn't place the melody. Crawled into his ears and filled the room with unease. It felt out of time, out of place, like hearing a childhood memory spoken in a dream. He looked at her more closely. Now her skin was pale, and her clothes, though soaked, looked strange, not dirty, but old-fashioned, like they belonged to another era. He asked her again who she was. She looked up this time, her eyes shining, and said, "I am the one they forgot." The lights flickered. Chris jumped and turned toward the switch. The room briefly plunged into darkness, then returned to light. The girl was gone. He stood frozen, looking around the room, heart pounding. Nothing had moved, but she was no longer there. The towel lay crumpled on the floor, the tea untouched, and the door still locked. He called out to her, his voice shaking. He searched the apartment, every corner, every closet, under every table and bed. She was nowhere. Then a knock came again. He turned to the door, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly he opened it. There she was, standing outside again, soaking wet again, eyes full of the same fear. "Please." She whispered again, "Let me in." Chris stepped back. She walked in past him again, but something felt different this time. Her steps were slower, heavier, and when she passed by him, the air turned cold. He followed her to the living room, where she stood, staring at the photo of his daughter on the table, her fingers trembling, her voice barely a whisper. "She looks like me?" Chris asked how she knew his daughter, and she turned to him with tears running down her face. "I tried to protect her, but I was too late." The words hit him like a punch. He demanded to know who she really was and what she meant, but she only said, "I remember the fire. I remember the screaming, and I remember your voice you promised me." Chris backed away shaken. He did not understand what she was saying, his mind racing, his heart thundering. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small folded photo. She handed it to him with trembling hands. It was his daughter standing beside the girl's same age, same clothes, same smile. But this photo was not recent. It was old, worn at the edges and faded with time. He looked up, but the girl was gone again. His breath caught in his throat. He turned in circles, calling her name, but the apartment was silent again. He dropped to his knees, holding the photo, his hands shaking more than ever. Then the window shattered, glass exploded across the room. Wind howled through the broken frame, and in that chaos stood two tall, shadowy figures, their shapes twisted and wrong. Their presence made his skin crawl, their eyes glowing faintly with something ancient and empty. He stumbled backward, fear gripping his chest. The girl appeared again, standing in front of him, her arms spread wide, shielding him from the figures behind her. "Go back," she screamed, her voice echoing with power that did not match her fragile frame. Shadows hissed and vanished into the wind, leaving only the broken window and the silence. Chris stared at the girl, who collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. She looked at him and whispered, "I was your daughter's friend. I died in the fire that night. I tried to save her. I failed." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she held his hand and said, "I came back because she called me from the other side. She misses you. She forgives you, but they are still looking for her." He could not speak. He could not breathe. The room spun around him as he clutched the photo to his chest. The last thing he remembered before fainting was the girl saying, "They will come again. And next time they won't stop at the door." Nina checked the time on her phone again, the digits glowing. 12 a.m. In the silent living room, the lights were dim, the curtains drawn, and the house too quiet for comfort. She shifted on the couch, pulling the blanket tighter around her legs, glancing at the baby monitor sitting on the table beside her. The screen showed the twin boys peacefully asleep in their cribs, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. She should have felt calm, but instead her body was tense, her eyes heavy yet wide awake. She had babysat at the Geller house before, but never this late, never when the whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath in the cold night air. A soft creak echoed from upstairs, the kind that made her heart jump before she told herself it was just the house settling. It was old, with wooden floors and drafty walls. Still, her pulse quickened, and she stared at the baby monitor for movement. Nothing changed. The boys remained still and safe. She reached for her hot cocoa and took a sip, though it was already cold. Her fingers tightened around the mug as she recalled the feeling she had had earlier that night when Mrs. Geller left for the emergency with her husband. Something about her parting words had stuck in Nina's mind. "If the boys cry, just rock them, and do not open the window in their room, no matter what you hear." It sounded strange, but Nina nodded and promised she would follow all instructions, even the odd ones. She had dealt with fussy kids before, and parents who had weird rules. This was nothing new, or so she thought. Another creak upstairs, then a low thump like something fell. She jumped up, dropping the blanket and staring at the ceiling, her breath shallow, heart thudding. She grabbed the baby monitor and turned the volume up. The screen blinked once, then static for 2 seconds, then came back to the usual image. But this time someone was standing in the room. She froze, the figure tall and still positioned between the cribs, not moving, not speaking, just watching her on the screen. Her hands went ice cold. The mug slipped from her grasp and shattered on the wooden floor below her feet. She stared hard at the screen, hoping it was a glitch, hoping her eyes were playing tricks, but it was there, a shadowy form clearly visible in the pale nightlight of the nursery. She bolted up the stairs, not thinking, just running on instinct. The baby monitor clutched tight in one hand. She reached the nursery door and stopped, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She could hear nothing, no footsteps, no cries, just the low hum of silence pressing against the door. She pushed it open and stepped in. The room was empty, both boys asleep, just like the monitor had shown earlier. No shadow, no figure, no sign of anything or anyone. She looked around, checked the closet under the crib behind the door. Even the window was locked from the inside. Confused, And shaken, she stepped back and stared at the baby monitor in her hand, the screen now showing only the peaceful cribs. Her heart was racing and her legs unsteady as she went back down, sat on the couch, and tried to steady her breath. Maybe she imagined it, maybe the monitor glitched, maybe stress and exhaustion were messing with her again. It had happened before, after the incident last year when that man followed her home from the campus library. Her life had never been the same since, and fear had become a companion. She curled up on the couch and tried to calm down, but sleep refused to come. Instead, her eyes stayed glued to the monitor, afraid of what it might show next. Then the lights flickered, the room darkened for just a moment before returning to dim yellow. The monitor blinked and went to black again, this time longer than before, and when the picture returned, both cribs were empty. She sat up sharply, her body frozen and her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, praying it was a mistake, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone to call Mrs. Geller, but her fingers stopped when the image on the screen changed again. It showed one of the boys standing at the edge of the crib, looking directly at the camera, his eyes wide and unmoving, and behind him the shadow was back, only this time it was closer. Nina ran to the stairs, heart-pounding feet stumbling over the carpeted steps. She reached the top and rushed into the nursery, her eyes scanning the room quickly. But both boys were asleep, exactly as before. No shadow, no movement, no sign of anything. She walked slowly to the crib where the baby had been standing in the video, but he lay there peacefully breathing, steady, no sign he had moved at all. She leaned over the monitor camera and checked it herself. Everything appeared normal. She stepped back, confused and terrified, not knowing what to believe anymore, her mind a mess of fear and doubt. She turned to leave the room. Then the door slammed shut behind her. She spun around and grabbed the doorknob, but it would not turn. It was locked from the outside. She pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the house stayed silent. Then the baby monitor beeped again. She looked down at it. The screen was filled with static, and then it went black again when the image returned. It was not the nursery, not the cribs. It showed the downstairs hallway where a figure was slowly climbing the stairs toward her. It was not human. Its limbs were too long, its face hidden in shadow, and it moved like it had no bones, gliding silently across the floor. Nina backed away from the door, panic rising in her chest. She scooped both boys into her arms, one by one, desperate to protect them. Her breaths came in gasps, her eyes never leaving the monitor screen where the figure was, now almost at the top step. Then everything went dark. The lights, the monitor, the hallway, all black. A sound like breathing, not hers, filled the room. Long, deep, heavy breaths, as if something was behind her. She turned slowly, every muscle in her body shaking, and saw nothing but shadows. Then a whisper in her ear, cold and low. They said you would keep them safe, but you failed, she screamed, and the lights returned, suddenly blinding her. The room was bright again, the boys crying loudly in her arms, and the door now open. She rushed downstairs with them, not stopping, not turning back, until she stood outside in the cold night air, gasping and sobbing. She called Mrs. Geller, told her everything, voice shaking, hands bleeding from gripping the crib so tight. Mrs. Geller arrived in minutes, her face pale and eyes hollow. She did not ask what happened. She only said, "You saw him too, didn't you?" Nina could only nod. Mrs. Geller whispered, "He comes for the children who cry after midnight, and he leaves a mark on those who fail to stop him." She pulled back Nina's sleeve, and there on her forearm was a handprint, dark and cold like frost that never melts. The mansion stood at the edge of the woods like a forgotten memory, towering above the treetops with broken windows and rotting wood. It had been abandoned for decades, or so the town believed. No one had dared enter since the fire that killed the last family who lived there, until Ryan made the dare. It was almost midnight, the air cold and sharp as knives. The 6 friends stood in a circle outside the front gate, their flashlights casting shaky beams across the peeling paint and rusted metal gates. Ryan smiled, trying to hide his own fear, and said, "Last one to be found loses their phone for a week." Everyone laughed nervously and agreed, but none of them noticed the way the wind died as they stepped through the gate, or how the crickets fell silent the moment the door creaked open. Inside, the mansion was colder than outside, filled with the scent of burned Wood and wet stone, the floor groaned under their steps, the wallpaper peeled like skin, and the air felt thick like it remembered the screams that once filled it. They spread out fast laughter, echoing through the halls as they scattered for hiding. Places Ryan slipped through a narrow doorway into what used to be a dining room. The table still there, covered in dust and ash. He crouched behind it, trying not to breathe too loud, his heart pounding louder than his thoughts. Memories hit him fast and hard, the sound of fire, the smell of smoke, and the face of his younger brother looking back at him through the flames years ago. Ryan had lived this nightmare once before in another house where his brother vanished during a game just like this. And they never found him. He shook his head, forcing the memory away, but the guilt clung to him like the ash on the floor. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, slow and heavy. Not like any of his friends' footsteps, these were dragging, limping, uneven. He held his breath. The light from his flashlight dimmed and flickered, then went out completely. Waited in the darkness, his hand over his mouth, listening as the steps moved past. The door then stopped, then turned back. The door creaked open, slow and painful, like it had not been touched in years. But no one entered the room. Just silence, then a low whisper, "I remember you." Ryan jumped to his feet, flashlight back on, the room empty. No one there. He ran out into the hallway, calling for his friends, but no one answered. He found Lily near the main stairs, tears in her eyes. Shaking, she said she heard someone call her name from upstairs, but when she went up, there was nothing except a mirror covered in soot, and when she wiped it clean, she saw someone behind her, someone who smiled with no lips. Tried to leave, but the front door would not open no matter how hard they pulled or pushed. It stayed shut, locked by something unseen. Something that wanted them to stay. One by one, the others appeared, all pale and scared, telling stories of voices, of shadows, of hands that reached from the dark. Only one was missing. Matt. They searched the mansion, calling his name, checking every room, every corner, until they heard it, a scream from the basement, sharp and full of terror. They rushed down the old stairs, the wood cracking under their feet, the air getting colder with each step. The basement was wide and empty, except for a single chair in the middle, and the boy who sat in it, Matt. But his eyes were wide and blank, and he did not move. They ran to him, but he whispered, "Do not touch me. He will know." Ryan asked who, but Matt just looked behind them and screamed, "Are you?" And the lights went out. The basement filled with the sound of something crawling on the ceiling, then dropping to the floor behind them. They ran upstairs, not looking back, but they could hear it following, something with long arms and no legs, scraping against the walls, hissing their names. They barricaded themselves in the old library, Ryan trembling with guilt and fear. He knew this was his fault. He brought them here. He woke the thing that slept beneath the house. Lily asked what happened to his brother. Ryan finally told them the truth, how they had played hide and seek, how his brother hid too well, how Ryan never found him, how the fire started in the basement, how he never told anyone that he heard his brother scream before the flames rose. He cried, then the pain, years old, pouring out with every breath. He said, I left him just like now then." The books fell from the shelves, a voice rising from beneath the floor, a voice that sounded like his brother saying, "You left me again." Ryan stood up, walked to the center of the room and shouted, "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Take me, not them." Silence followed, then the door creaked open on its own. The hallway beyond filled with soft light, not harsh or cold, but warm. A shadow stepped into the doorway, a figure with Ryan's eyes and his brother's smile. It nodded once and whispered, "You remembered." Ryan turned to his friends and said, "Go now while you can." They begged him to come, but he shook his head. "I need to stay. I need to finish this." They left, running through the now open front door into the cold night, the mansion behind them glowing faintly, then fading into the dark as if it was never there. Ryan never came out. The house was gone the next morning. No sign of fire or wood or ash, just grass. Empty field, but they all remembered. And sometimes at night when they passed by the woods, they heard laughter and a voice saying, "Ready or not here." I come. Emma lay in her dorm bed, staring at the ceiling as the digital clock on her desk clicked from 2 to 3 a.m., the soft red light casting eerie shadows across the room. Her roommate Amy had still not come back, and the silence in the room felt too Heavy too unnatural, like something was watching from just beyond the edge of light. A whisper brushed against her ear. Though she was alone, she sat up quickly, heart racing, her breath uneven and skin cold with fear. The room was still empty. The door was locked, the window closed. She rubbed her arms, trying to shake off the chill, but it clung to her like damp fog. 2 weeks ago, she would have laughed at the idea of being scared in her own dorm room. But that was before the strange things started happening, before the notes began appearing, before the night she found her phone recording her while she slept and she had not pressed record, and most of all before Amy changed. Amy used to be quiet, kinda little shy, always offering help with homework or sharing snacks. She was the first person who made Emma feel safe after the breakup, after the months of stalking and fear. But now Amy felt like a stranger, her eyes too still, her smile too wide, her words too careful. Emma tried to talk about it with others, but no one took her seriously. They said, maybe you are still healing, maybe you are seeing things. But Emma knew something was wrong. Last night, she woke to find Amy standing beside her bed, not moving, not speaking, just standing and staring. Emma pretended to sleep, too afraid to breathe, too afraid to ask what she was doing. When morning came, Amy acted normal, like nothing happened, and tonight she was missing again. Emma stood slowly, walked to the desk, and picked up the small journal she had been keeping, writing everything that happened, every odd moment, every whisper, every detail. Just in case, she flipped through the pages, her hands trembling, then froze on the last page, one she had not written on yet. Words were there, written in shaky ink. I know what you did, I know who you are. The pen dropped from her hand, the sound echoing louder than it should. She turned toward the closet, hearing something inside shift, slowly, like fabric being dragged across wood. She stepped closer, her breath held the silence pressing in harder. With every step she reached out and pulled the door open fast. Nothing, just clothes and shoes and boxes stacked neatly, but something was off. The air smelled wrong, like metal and dirt and something else, something sharp and sickly. She knelt and opened the lowest box. Inside were clothes, not hers, not Amy's clothes, belonging to her ex-boyfriend who had vanished months ago after the restraining order, after he broke into her apartment one last time and then disappeared. Her mind raced, her body froze. She reached for her phone, but it was gone. Not on the desk, not under the pillow, just gone. Then the door opened. Amy stepped in slowly, quietly, her hands behind her back, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, and her mouth curled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. You are still awake, she said softly. That is good. I wanted to talk. Emma stood frozen, the box still open behind her, the photo of her ex on top, the one she never shared with anyone. And Amy stepped closer, her steps too light, like she was gliding. Emma asked, where were you? Amy said, I was finishing something very important, something that keeps you safe. Pulled her hands forward, slowly revealing a knife, not raised, not threatening, just there, shining in the soft light, like a warning, like a secret. Emma backed away until her back hit the desk. Her voice cracked as she asked, what did you do? Amy tilted her head and said, I took care of it. He cannot hurt you anymore. I found him. I made sure he stopped breathing. The room spun, the walls pulsed with Emma's heartbeat, the air thick and loud and still. Amy stepped closer again and whispered, you were so scared. I saw it every night. You kept waking up crying, shaking, calling his name in your sleep. I had to help you. I had to stop him. Emma dropped to her knees, tears filling her eyes, her mind breaking into pieces. She asked, why would you do that? And Amy said, because I love you, because no one else ever will. Then the police sirens filled the air. Amy looked toward the window and smiled. She sat on the bed, calmly placed the knife on the sheet, and crossed her legs as if nothing had happened. Emma ran to the door, flung it open, and screamed for help. And in moments, the hallway filled with lights, voices, hands grabbing her, pulling her away from the room, from the nightmare that wore her roommate's face. Later, the officers searched Amy's side of the room. They found letters, photos, items belonging to Emma's ex, and recordings of Emma sleeping, whispering, crying, begging someone to leave her alone. Amy had been recording her for weeks, watching, waiting, collecting everything until the moment she acted. Emma sat in the campus therapist's office days later, The events still fresh, raw, her hands still shaking, her thoughts scattered like broken glass. She kept asking herself, what if I never looked? What if I kept pretending? The therapist said you were lucky, and Emma nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. In the end, the college moved her to a new dorm, gave her space-time healing, but the nights remained hard. The shadows still crept in the silence, still whispered, and sometimes, just before sleep, she thought she saw Amy smile again in the corner of the room. She wrote one last note in her journal before locking it away forever. Some people save you by destroying everything around you, but sometimes saving is just another way to keep control, and love can be the scariest thing of all. Jason opened his eyes to a blinding white light above him. A strange humming filled his ears. Soft and steady like a machine breathing. His body was heavy, his arms strapped to the sides of the bed, and his legs too numb to move. Walls around him were pale and cold, everything silent except the beep of a machine and the soft whisper of someone out of sight. He turned his head slowly and saw a nurse sitting by the window, her back straight, her hands folded on her lap, and her eyes watching the rain outside. Where am I? He asked, voice dry and weak. Nurse turned and smiled, her face calm, her voice low and steady. You are safe now. You are in the hospital. You have been here for 3 nights since they found you near the woods, bleeding and cold. Jason blinked, memories crashing through his mind like broken glass. The car, the dark road, the rain, the voice that told him to turn left, and the woman in white standing at the edge of the forest, calling his name with a voice that was not hers. He closed his eyes tight, trying to silence the thoughts, but they poured in fast and loud. He saw his wife, her face pale, her mouth open, as she screamed, her hands reaching for him as he walked away. The front door slammed shut behind him, the sound like a coffin closing. He had not seen her since that night, and now her face haunted every moment since he woke up. The nurse stood and walked over to his bed. She held a small mirror and said, you should look. Hesitated, then nodded slowly. She held the mirror in front of him, and he stared at the reflection. The man looking back at him was hollow eyes, sunken beard, thick and messy, and skin pale like paper. He barely recognized himself. We're not supposed to survive, she said gently, but you did, and now you must face the truth. He looked at her confused, fear rising again. What truth? She stepped aside, and a doctor entered the room, his face lined with sadness and something else, something darker. The doctor pulled a chair close and sat beside him, folding his hands before speaking. Your mind has been hiding from something you did, something you could not accept. Jason tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. The doctor continued, your wife is dead, Jason, and you killed her. Words hit like thunder in a storm, loud and crushing. He shook his head. No, I did not. I left. I walked out. She was alive. I never touched her. But the doctor shook his head slowly. You did not walk out, you never left, you stayed, and the fight turned into something worse. Your anger took control, and when it was over, she was gone, and you ran. Jason screamed, but no sound came, his mouth open in silent horror, the room spinning, the light flickering above him. He saw flashes, now blood on the wall, her body on the floor, his hands shaking as he held her. One last time whispering, I did not mean to. The nurse whispered again, we brought you here because your guilt brought you back to us. Jason looked at her. Her eyes were wet with something like sorrow or understanding. And then he saw something else. His wife standing behind her, her white dress stained, her eyes locked on his. She stepped forward slowly, no anger on her face, only sadness. You left me, she said, and then softer, you forgot what we promised. He reached for her, tears running down his face. I am sorry, I was broken, I was weak, I was afraid. She knelt beside him, touched his face, and whispered, you can still be whole, but only if you tell the truth. Only if you stop running. He nodded, sobbing, shaking. The nurse and the doctor stood back as he spoke, every word, every memory, every moment he had buried deep for months. He confessed it all, to the air, to the shadows, to the world, and when he finished, the room changed. The light grew warmer, the walls no longer cold, the bed softer beneath him. Nurse smiled, and the doctor nodded. You are free now, she said, and walked away. His wife stood one last time, kissed his forehead, and whispered goodbye before fading into the soft light. Jason was moved to a quiet recovery center where he spent his days. Walking in gardens, writing letters to no one, and sleeping through the nights without fear. He never forgot what he did. He never tried to hide from it again. He faced every morning with truth, every night with peace. He wrote one last note and left it on the windowsill for anyone who came after. Sometimes we do terrible things, and sometimes we bury them deep enough to forget. But the mind remembers, the soul remembers, and when the clock strikes midnight, the truth comes back to finish what guilt began. And in that final hour, we do not run, we do not hide, we speak, we heal, we begin again. The end.